Those of us who live in comfort and security, which is probably everybody listening to this broadcast, like to imagine that we deserve all of the good things that come our way. But let's pause for a moment to think about some of the advantages that might have paved our paths. In my own case, I'm not talking about money. I don't come from a wealthy family, and I wouldn't have been able to get my university degrees without a full package of scholarships, loans, side jobs. But growing up in a country with the ability and the desire to see its children through higher education is one of those advantages I'm talking about. For half of us, being male gives us a big head start. Our teachers assume that we'll be quicker in math and in science and technology. We're much less likely to be sexually harassed at work, and on average we earn 20% more than our female counterparts. Where I grew up in America, being white was a huge advantage over my black and Hispanic neighborhoods. I was never subjected to police stop and frisks, no suspicions that I was in a store to shoplift. Nobody redlined our family from getting housing in neighborhoods with good schools like Donald Trump did when he was a landlord in New York. The 90-some-odd% of us who are straight are not subjected to job discrimination, or even jail, as happens in some countries, based on who we love. And these inequities are real. So if we think about race or sex or sexual orientation, we readily see how they might affect the way that we're treated in school, the doors that are open to us or slammed in our faces, the internships, the jobs, the references, the bank loans that were offered or denied. But these are also things that we talk about as a society. And we have names for them: racism, sexism, homophobia. Many people recognize these inequities as problems and they push to solve them. But now, would you say that any of the Bushes on the left are more innately qualified to lead a country, that they have more capable, smarter DNA than any of the Tanzanians on the right? Or do Bushes get where they get because they're born with silver spoons in their mouths, with every advantage, right, from prenatal care on up? And those of us whose parents enjoyed some of these privileges are likely to have benefited from a lot of subtle little extras. Things like extracurricular programs, dental checkups, cultural excursions to museums and to shows, travel, a sufficient and healthy diet, professional connections. And these unsung little advantages will never grace the lives of kids who leave for school with barely a breakfast, or make our clothes in sweatshops instead of going to school, or come home from school and go straight to the fields. One of my favorite gifts when I was about 12 years old was a gift certificate from a local bookstore. I spent hours in the store choosing as many books as possible that I'd enjoy and that would add up to the exact total on the gift card. This was a gift from my grandparents, who were educators who saw that my enjoyment and success in learning was their duty to posterity. Decades later, my sister is building on the same heritage. She sends my 7-year-old daughter books that have these great positive messages to overcome the sexism that my little girl will encounter in her life. But this is an example of how we gain from advantages that build over the generations. But there are also examples of an advantage that doesn't even have a name. My family could send me to the bookstore or to the library. My sister can send books to her niece because books are plentiful in our mother tongue. Because of the language that I was born into, I had open to me a world of volcanoes and dragons and science experiments and medieval conquests. My daughter has painters and pilots and architects and explorers. And now with the internet, it's not just books. We can ask Google about anything we want to know about: the nutritional value of mushrooms, the original cantons of Switzerland. How do we calculate the age of that tree outside without cutting it down? Secret as pie. A good portion of the world's knowledge is available to us because, as luck would have it, we speak English. And French speakers have a similar advantage, German speakers, Japanese, Italians, Russians. Though correlation doesn't prove causation, and there are a lot of other factors at play, income, life expectancy, and access to knowledge in one's native language march closely together. Let me add a couple more advantages that you probably enjoy, and that we do have names for: healthcare, electricity. Without electricity, you can't run a computer or a smartphone. You do your homework by the light of an oil lamp. I've seen this many times in many African households. You can't keep your food or vaccines or your medicines fresh and safe. Without healthcare, That's obvious, right? So that's so obvious that in most places it's illegal to deny somebody treatment because they are female or black or gay. But healthcare is denied all the time because of language. An immigrant who can't speak to a doctor can't get proper care. People with HIV who can't follow the instructions for their drug cocktails because they can't read them, can't take them correctly. And children can't become doctors or nurses and serve their own people if they don't understand the language in which health science is taught. But because linguistic exclusion is an unnamed disadvantage, it marches in silence. Listen to this statement from a Ford Foundation blog post, which highlights the advantages that we gain from an omnipresent, open internet in a language that we understand. The internet is not a luxury. Broadband is an essential public utility and must be equally accessible to everyone, because it enables people to express themselves, to organize, to make a living, to participate in policymaking, to get a job, to earn an education, and do all of the critical things that we so often take for granted. However, piping in broadband in the wrong language is like laying water pipes with no clean water source to draw from. Language is a thick glass wall to the open internet, to political participation, to getting a job, to earning an education. We recognize that the internet is an essential utility, like water and electricity, but we still don't recognize that it's useless to the billions of people who can't read and interact in the lucky languages. The typical response I hear in Europe, the US, even in elite circles in Africa and India and in South America is, let them learn English. Let them learn French. Let them learn Spanish. We did it. It worked for us. Anyone can learn a second language, right? And who but those unsuccessful people are speaking the local languages? Well, yes, you do speak a privileged language, but that's either an accident of birth or a lot of study that your circumstances made possible. 95% of Africans are not literate in their European languages that their governments inherited from their colonizers, and they'll be a quarter of the world's population by 2030. Everyone I talk to in India tells me that everyone in India speaks English, and they're right. Everyone does. But their cook doesn't, and their housekeeper doesn't, and their driver doesn't. 95% don't, and they won't, and their children don't, and their grandchildren won't. Billions, literally billions of people whose mother tongues are on the wrong side of military or economic power are perpetually excluded from paths towards knowledge and prosperity because people in governments and in funding agencies think that the language they speak is worthless, if not a downright impediment to progress. Now, despite the indifference or hostility from many of these decision makers, we at Camusi are working on solutions to eradicate language as a barrier in reaching internationally declared goals for social development. 496 years ago, Martin Luther figured out that local language was elemental to participation when he translated the Bible into German. And this idea spread like wildfire on the back of a brand new technology at the time called the printing press. And missionaries have been spreading the Bible around the world in hundreds of languages ever since, spreading their ideas in the vernacular. Now, we can't pretend that moving from ink to electrons, from the printing press to the tablet, is going to magically make all of these people learn one of these languages that we already privileged people happen to speak. Rather, what we're suggesting through our methods is that we work with much smaller numbers of people within language communities to collect the information that we need to produce linguistic equity for their languages. Then we can plug that information right into the technologies that have already been developed for languages like English and French and German that have done the heavy lifting technologically, and the universal translation that this system enables can open universal knowledge to everyone, including the cook and the housekeeper and the driver and their children who dream of becoming doctors and nurses. So I'll close with a 2-minute version of what could be a 2-hour dive into some very complicated problems. But first, there's a question that many of you are dying to ask. Doesn't Google already do this? The short answer is no, not at all. They don't, and they can't. The basic issue is data. For most languages, digitized data doesn't exist at all. And where digitized data does exist, it doesn't line up across languages. Briefly, and I will leave out a lot of complexity that explains how Google has actually gotten pretty good at translating between a few favored languages in certain situations, here's why they're always going to fail in more than 99% of translation scenarios, and how Camusi has re-engineered linguistic data so that we can navigate towards language equity. Now, there are only 2 million pixels on a high-res screen, and we need 25 million, so I prepared this fabric to show the proportions accurately. So this fabric is the universe of human languages. And the silver needle shows the space that Google and others are working on in between English and other languages. And the little red rectangle more or less shows the other pairs with active projects around the planet. The rest of the fabric is the void in linguistic knowledge that Camusi aims to fill. So what are we doing differently? Well, most dictionaries start with a word like light. Light is a lot of things. It's not dark, it's not heavy, it's not serious, it's not fattening. And in a monolingual dictionary, you can differentiate things that share a single spelling by using ones and twos and A's and B's and C's. But if you start adding in other languages, we're adding French, and now we've put in Swahili and Finnish and Thai, and you connect them on the basis of that English word in the middle, you really very quickly find yourself in this hopeless tangle, what I call linguistic linguini. We're taking a different starting point. We're at the concept. We're treating millions of different ideas, not dark, not heavy, not serious, not fattening. And then we connect them vertically for the features that they do share, like spelling or pluralization or pronunciation. But we match the concepts to equivalent words for that idea in French and in Swahili and any other language. And in principle, we can extend to a matrix that connects all 7,000 human languages, and we never get confused by those arbitrary coincidences of spelling in English. Beyond words, we can also stitch together elements like verb conjugations and dialect variations, working towards a repository that combines a lot of really extensive linguistic data in very complex ways, within and between languages, on an equal basis. So where Google is saying this Arabic word is light, and that Arabic word is light, and we're gonna guess that you want that statistically most frequent one from our corpus, Camusi is saying this Arabic word is a device for igniting fires, which translates to mechero in Spanish, and shatitin in Finnish, and kibiriti in Swahili. And that Arabic word is electromagnetic radiation that can produce a visual sensation, which is luth in Spanish, and valo in Finnish, and mwanga in Swahili. And we can make much smarter translation and processing decisions based on that knowledge. Building on these certainties, then we can fill in a plethora of technological and social voids that stem from linguistic inequity and that are detailed on our webpage and are being worked on by students at Camusi Labs. For example, we can produce definitions in languages like Akan and Sinhala for the equivalence of electromagnetic and radiation and visual and sensation, so that students in Sri Lanka and Ghana and anywhere else can understand the idea of light as energy, and then they can pass their physics exams. Eventually, we will be able to untangle the linguini, to automate pretty good translations between any languages for which we can collect data, and connect the languages at a molecular level that erases language as a barrier, working towards a full matrix of human expression across time and space. By recognizing our linguistic privilege, we can act on it. Billions of people are slated for perpetual exclusion from global engines of knowledge and prosperity by accident of being born into the wrong language. This is a wrong that we can right. We can choose. Do we luxuriate in the privilege of our own linguistic luck? Or do we recognize the inequities, assemble the knowledge, and build the tools that we need to make every language the right language?